Just to give you an idea, you can get to be a red tree simply by calling your company the first. Now, this is a perfect example of what I'll talk about later on. When I wrote this, I've used this example for years. As people got older, they didn't know the answer to this. But maybe, do you know who the first person was to fly solo over the Atlantic? Well, you'll remember now. It was Lindbergh, Charles Lindbergh, in 1923. So in a way, that was novel. That stuck out. Who was number two? You know what the answer is? Nobody cares. The brain pays attention to the novelty, and first is one way to be novelty. So if you want to, if you can look at your company's assets, see what you're doing differently, say we're the first company in Estonia or Latvia, Eastern Europe to do X. You can get yourself some novelty real easily, real quickly. It's got to be for real though. You just can't be making it up. So here's what's happened. On the left, you see a part of your brain called the amygdala that literally lights up with novelty. And when it lights up with novelty, more neurons fire. Your brain without novelty is on the right. So what you want to do is create this neural activation in a part of your customer's brain with the amygdala with novelty. But there's a problem. Novelty is not enough. Novelty, if you want longevity, has to be attached to meaning. Without meaning, there's no long-term relationship. You can get somebody to pay attention with novelty, but you have to hook into what's meaningful to your customer before you have longevity. So there was a thing back, this was in the 70s, I think, or early 80s, and a guy put together a thing called the pet rock. He put a rock in a box, and he sold a bazillion of them. I met him. And what he did is he put a rock in a box, and he said, Mr. President, you can have your own pet. You can take it wherever you want to. You don't have to feed it. You don't have to give it water, and you don't have to take it to go out to the bathroom. It's the perfect pet. And people bought literally millions of these things in a little box and gave them to each other at Christmases. It was so funny. But the problem was there was no, I think the guy lasted for about between 12 to 16 really hard weeks in sales. And then after that, it just totally disappeared. Why? Have meaning. Meaning creates relationship. So if you don't know what's meaningful to your customer, you're in trouble. Understanding your customer is dramatically important. So going back to the frontal lobe, when you talk about what's meaningful to your customer, it activates the front part of their brain. I don't know how many out there use an iPhone or a Mac, but Mac has deep meaning to customers. Their frontal lobe lights up. So a new iPhone comes out and people want to look at it. They may not want to buy it right away, but they've got a relationship with it. So if you're an Apple person, you stay an Apple person because Apple has accessed your meaning network. Okay, let me explain a little more. So when you will activate meaning in people, you activate that prefrontal cortex, and I mean very simple here, but it also activates all these other parts of the brain. The insular cortex, the prefrontal cortex, the posterior gyrus, it activates dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. It activates short-term, long-term memory, a thing called the hippocampus. Without meaning, they this amygdala, this novelty, but that's it. Or if you're not using novelty, you're not even activating the amygdala. So you want to activate the middle part of the brain to get people to go, wow, and then you want to give them something that's really meaningful to them to build relationship. Because when you build relationship, you see this happening. Literally billions of neurons fire. Neuroscience, the #1 learning rule is called the Hebbian synapsual learning rule, which means the more learning, the more neurons that fire, the more learning and behavior change that happens. So without this neural firing, you can't get people to buy things. So what we want to do is make sure that we get a lot of this neural firing going on here. So anyway. So when you activate the meaning network of others, magic happens.